Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ashley Johnson, and I am here to introduce tonight's speaker, Adrian Arellano. Did I say it correctly? No?
Arellano.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Yes, sir.
He is a Southside native of the city of Chicago and has lived in the very same neighborhood for the last 21 years. He went to Lane Tech High School and is currently attending IUC as an undergraduate student in his third year. Prior to working for the congressman, Adrian worked in a nonprofit organization where he served as a public health advocate. He worked as a community organizer, having worked to make health resources available to underrepresented neighborhoods in Chicago. And currently he is your caseworker and grant specialist at Congressman Brad Schneider's office, who has offices right across the street from the library, actually. There he manages casework related to inquiries about Social Security, the IRS, as well as immigration. So if you have any questions about any of those things, you're always welcome to reach out to Congressman Brad Schneider's office, and you might be directed to Adrian. He also handles the grant research requests there as well. So he can offer letter of support requests, as well as he can share with you the monthly grant newsletter that they send out through the office. He's excited to be here with you today and to educate you about the various tax credits available to anyone looking to purchase an electric vehicle, especially in the state of Illinois. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Adrian, and we're going to learn about buying and driving an electric car. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, can you hear me? Cool. All right. Cool. Thank you, Ashley, for introducing me to everyone today. So as Ashley mentioned, my name is Adrian Arellano, and my official title over at the office is the Constituent Service Representative. So aside from what we're going to be going over today, as Ashley mentioned, if you ever have any questions regarding to Social Security, or let's say if you need a last minute passport because you're going on a vacation, or if you have a family emergency that you need to leave the country, you're more than welcome to reach out to our office. And I may or may not be the caseworker handling that inquiry, but like I said, you're more than welcome to reach out. So, and then you can head on to the next slide. Cool. So right now in the state of Illinois, there's currently a lot of work being done to promote the implementation of renewable energy, but then also in specific, the electrification of infrastructure and vehicles. So currently in the state of Illinois, there are 12 incentives being offered, 2 utility and private incentives that those are being offered through private organizations or through other stakeholders in the state of Illinois. And then also the state does have 25 laws and regulations to kind of, again, implement that renewable energy and to really become, a more green friendly state. And I did put a link on there. So if you're ever interested in perhaps what other regulations are being offered, you're more than welcome to go to the link down below, which is the state of Illinois' website. And you can head on to the next link. Cool. So right now, there's a lot of tax credits being offered, both at the federal and the state level. Currently, there is a $7,500 incentive being offered for the federal government, along with a $4,000 incentive from the state of Illinois. So depending on which vehicle you purchase, you could be looking up to almost $12,000 in tax credits, which obviously is a big deal for a lot of people to kind of make that switch over to electric vehicles. And you can head on to the next slide. Cool. So as mentioned, the federal government is currently providing up to $7,500 in the form of a tax credit. And to kind of go over what a tax credit means, it basically reduces the total amount of income tax you owe at the end of each given tax year. So for example, if you purchase a car for $50,000 and you're provided with that $7,500 tax credit, then the total cost of that vehicle would actually decrease to about $42,500. However, one thing about the federal tax credit is that unfortunately not all vehicles qualify for that tax credit. So for example, Teslas, I know everyone's a fan of Teslas, myself included, although I um, do have to look into purchasing one. Again, it kind of really depends on the vehicle that you're purchasing. So, for example, the Rivian, both the SUV and the pickup truck that just came out do actually qualify for the 7,500 tax credit. And in general, too, the plug-in hybrid vehicles don't qualify for the full 7,500, but hybrid vehicles do qualify for this tax incentive, which you will see later on that the state of Illinois does not cover. Although, given all of these wonderful things that the federal government is doing, one thing to note is that used vehicles, unfortunately, do not qualify for this tax credit. And you can head on to the next slide. Cool. So there is paperwork that needs to be done in order to go ahead and receive those federal tax credits. And our office could very well help you in making sure that you claim the credits that you um, rightfully deserve. So, for example, vehicles being used for either personal or business purposes qualify for this credit. So, it doesn't matter whether you're using the vehicle for yourself or if you bought it for your business, you very well qualify for this tax credit. So, to claim the credit for personal use, there has to be a form filled out. It is an IRS form called the 8936. And that credit must be reported on your 1040 tax return at the end of each year. So, for example, if you were to buy a vehicle this year, let's say you bought one in August, then for the following um, tax filing, that's when you would claim that 7,500 or whatever the amount may be. There's a little bit more needed if you are claiming the credit for business use. That same form does have to be completed. However, in addition to that, um, so must the IRS's form 3800. And like I mentioned, if for whatever reason the credits are not received, you're more than welcome to contact me directly, and I threw my email on there. So if you ever want to, contact me specifically for this or for anything else, you're more than welcome to save that email. And another thing too to note is if you have questions on whether or not a specific model qualifies for the incentive, your best bet would definitely be to reach out to your local dealer for any assistance in acquiring those credits. Since again, not all vehicles are covered under the federal tax credit. As I mentioned, unfortunately, Teslas no longer qualify for that tax credit, which is a bummer. But yeah, as I mentioned, you are more than welcome to check out what specific models are covered under the tax credit, and all that information's online on the website that I mentioned earlier. And you can go on to the next slide. Cool. So the state of Illinois is also offering their own form of a tax credit, which actually just came out this year, a part of the CEJA Act. Like I mentioned, they're offering a tax credit for anyone purchasing an EV, which also includes electric motorcycles and used vehicles. So another thing to note about the federal tax credit is that it does not include electric motorcycles. So it's pretty exciting that the state of Illinois is kind of, implementing that into their own tax credit. So beginning July 1st of this year, you are eligible for $1,000 in the form of a tax credit, and it can be claimed for purchasing an EV. And that would be pretty much like a flat 4,000. There's not like any like differences in like depending like what model you get or what make you get. And if you are buying an electric motorcycle, you can get up to 1,500. So unfortunately, is a little bit less than if you were to just purchase an outright electric vehicle. But nonetheless, you are eligible for 1,500. And then throughout the next 4 years, starting July 1st, that credit unfortunately decreases to 2,000. And then following that 2 years later, that credit also decreases to $1,000. And it's also the same thing for the electric motorcycle incentive. It basically gets cut in half. So it would go from 1,500 to 750, and then about $300. So as I mentioned, if you have any questions on whether or not an EV qualifies for the incentive that you're inquiring about, you're more than welcome to reach out to your local dealer to see what your options would be. One thing to note is if you are interested in buying a Tesla, you would be able to claim the $4,000 with this state tax credit. And you can go on to the next slide. Cool. So there are a ton of eligibility requirements for the Illinois electric vehicle tax credit, and I threw some of them up here. However, this isn't like an all-inclusive list. As I mentioned, all this information is available on the CEJA, which is a part of the Illinois legislation that they just passed last year. And some of the eligibility is that the vehicle must be purchased on or after July 1st. So if you bought a vehicle in April of this year, you would not be able to claim that tax credit. So you would have to wait. So given that, obviously it's already past July 1st, if you were to buy one at any point from now on, you'd be eligible for the $4,000. Also, the purchaser does have to reside in the state of Illinois at the time of the vehicle purchase and at the time the rebate is issued, which could very well take a couple of months up to a year. Another thing to note is that the vehicle must be purchased from a dealer licensed by the Illinois Secretary of State. Again, that's why it's important to reach out to your local dealer if you have any questions on whether or not the dealership itself would even be eligible for you to receive that tax credit. Another thing to note is that rented or leased vehicles do not qualify for this tax credit. Another thing too is that the vehicle can have been the subject of a previous EV rebate under this new program in Illinois. Another thing to note is that the purchaser does have to remain ownership for about a year, and it does have to be consecutive. So it has to be 12 consecutive months immediately after you purchased it. So if you were to buy it August 1st, you would have to hold on to it until August 1st of 2023. Another thing too is that you do have to apply for the rebate within 90 days after the vehicle purchase date. Let's say if it's day 91 and you forgot, or you got tied up and you, for whatever reason, you weren't able to apply for that rebate, unfortunately you would not be able to get that $4,000 or the $1,500. And there are some more documentation that is needed, and we'll talk a little bit more on the upcoming slides, but some of those things do include a copy of the purchase invoice, proof of purchase, vehicle registration coming directly from the state of Illinois, and also your IRS's W-9 or W-8 forms. And you'll see later why the W-9 and W-8 forms come in handy. And you can go on to the next slide. Cool. So there's a ton of paperwork that's involved, whether it's for like the federal tax credit or just the state tax credit. So that's a bummer, but we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that paperwork today. So again, you're eligible for this tax credit, whether it's for personal or business use. To claim this credit, a separate application must be completed, which is available again on the state of Illinois CEJA website. And it does have to be mailed to basically the Illinois version of the EPA, and it has to be postmarked. And another thing too is that there's a deadline actually for this tax credit. So the application has to be postmarked within 90 days after purchasing the EV, and it also has to be postmarked on or on before the end of the rebate cycle. So as of right now, the current cycle ends on September 30th. So pretty much you would have up until like now, until September 30th to go ahead and purchase that vehicle to be eligible for the $4,000. Cool. And then another thing, you can go on to the next slide. Cool. And another thing too, because I know a lot of people are worried about like the charging infrastructure and like, how do I make it from point A to point B without having to worry about, where am I going to charge up? The state of Illinois does actually have a tax credit that's being offered for EV charging stations. So again, the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency is going to offer rebates to public and private entities for the installation and maintenance of fast charging stations. So what they mean about the public and private entities, that could be, for example, businesses. So the library, the Vernon Library would be able to qualify for that tax credit. It could be local townships, it could be, municipalities, state government, whatever it may have you, they would be eligible to claim that tax credit. Another thing too to note is that the rebate awards may cover very well up to 80% of the project's costs. So again, if it's $10,000, it'll cover up to $8,000, so that the only thing you'll have to pay out of pocket is $2,000. And then another thing too to note is depending on where the EV charging stations are within the district, but also throughout the state of Illinois, there are going to be additional rebates offered for any stations in underserved and environmental justice communities. And at the moment, there's no application available. However, it is expected to arrive sometime late summer, early fall. So that's something to be on the lookout as well. And then another thing too, while we're on this topic, again, since a lot of people are worried about, I guess, the infrastructure and how you would be able to actually charge your vehicle. So in recent news, Tesla itself is also in the process of trying to open up its fast charging stations pretty much to like any electric vehicle. Again, that's still in the works, but nonetheless, there's currently a lot of work being done to try to make a lot of that charging available. And then obviously, as you know, depending on which make and model you get, there's fast chargers that you can install in your home. And ultimately, that would be the most convenient way about going about it. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of new charging stations coming out, such as the one over at the library. So you should be on the lookout for that. So the timeline for receiving the tax credits looks a little bit something like this. I know we kind of talked about it in the previous slide, but nonetheless, I'll go ahead and cover it again. So the way it would work for the federal tax credit is, again, the credit can be filed with each year's taxes. So if a person purchased a vehicle in 2021, then they can claim the credit when filing their 21 taxes in 2022. And then same thing, if they purchased a vehicle this year, then they can claim it next year when they're filing this year's taxes. And then also, like, what if you file your taxes already and have not claimed the tax credit? You can actually file an amended tax return, which can be filed for previous years, but depending on whether you owe money or you were issued a refund, the timeline for that could vary depending on whether it's 2 or 3 years. It's 3 years if you were issued a refund, then it's 2 years if you owed money to the federal government. And for state tax credit, as I mentioned, there's no set timeline of when a taxpayer would receive the tax credit. However, could take up to a year, and it will be mailed out in the form of a check. So it would not be direct deposited. You would get it sent straight to the address that's listed on file. Cool. So I know we kind of talked a lot about electric vehicles and a lot of the things that the state and the federal government are offering. But nonetheless, if you ever have any questions related to any of the topics that we discussed today, or if you, for whatever reason, did not receive that tax credit when filing your federal tax returns, you're more than welcome to reach out to our office. I did throw my email on there, so if you want to take a screenshot of that and save it. And I also did throw my direct line on there. So again, if you ever have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me directly. And I'll go ahead and check the chat and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, we have a lot of chat questions. If you want, I can read them off to you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because I can't see.
You got it. I'm your happy assistant here. Okay, so I'll start from the top. Before we got started, a patron or an attendee mentioned that they have an Aptera, which I Googled it, and it looks like they say it's a 3-wheeled enclosed auto cycle. And I understand Illinois will give the $4,000 rebate for a car and a $1,500 rebate for a motorcycle, but my Illinois rep tells me I will not get any rebate from my Aptera. This seems wrong. Please comment.
That's a really good question. As I mentioned, the state of Illinois right now, they're only offering incentive for 4-wheel vehicles and 2-wheel vehicles. So unfortunately, if it's a 3-wheel,
so it's that third wheel, huh?
But that's definitely something that legislators can look into in terms of like the funding for those incentives. And another thing really too, while we're on the topic for funding, is that it's pretty much capped at $17 million for the state of Illinois. So that money could very well run out pretty quickly. So it's pretty much
Yeah.
like once it runs out, that's it. But as far as a three-wheel vehicle, that's definitely something that your local state legislator can look into, since it is the state incentive. Unfortunately, the congressman wouldn't be able to, introduce legislation for that, but nonetheless, the state of Illinois could look into that. But that's cool
That's
that they're coming
interesting.
with,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so another question is there an income limitation to the tax credit?
No. So for the state of Illinois, what they're trying to do is they're really trying to push that tax credit in underrepresented and marginalized communities. However, there's no sort of like limitation on like the 4,000 in terms of like if you make over this money, you'll get a certain percentage cut off of the tax credit. So in terms of income, you wouldn't have to worry for either the federal or tax credit. But the state of Illinois is really trying to push this tax credit to, again, underrepresented and marginalized communities. But yeah, you wouldn't have to worry about that.
And are these for electric vehicles only or hybrids included?
That's a good question because I didn't throw that on there. So for the state of Illinois, unfortunately, it does not cover hybrid vehicles. So
What about plug-in hybrids?
like plug-in, no, it's only straight up like electric and
only EV. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You answered this, but I think we could go over it again because it's a good question. Are more charging stations on the horizon?
Yeah. So again, the state of Illinois did really try to also think of like the infrastructure itself. So you don't want to just throw vehicles out on the road and not have them anywhere for them to go charge. So they do have money set aside for the funding of these charging stations, which a lot of, again, public and private entities have already been applying for. And Tesla is in particular one company that is really trying to push opening up their charging stations, since right now it's currently closed off to only Tesla owners, and trying to really push to make it available for anyone. And also another thing too, while we're on the topic of chargers, is that in general, Tesla owners tend to see cheaper costs, again, because it is closed off and only Tesla owners can use their charging stations. So let's say if you own a Rivian, you could only go to certain chargers, and that does tend to be a little bit more expensive because it's basically a third party. And on top of that, sorry, my dogs are going crazy. But on top of the cost that's already being incurred, the third party also adds an additional cost. So it does end up being a little bit more expensive to charge your vehicle, unfortunately, if you have anything other than a Tesla.
I was talking with my colleague and she was mentioning I think they're building a new Thornton's gas station in like Riverwoods, and at the gas station they have plans to, like, all new gas stations, at least nice gas stations, will have electric charging in their sort of like infrastructure plans, which I thought was kind of smart as far as like gas stations go.
And another thing too is that the gas stations qualify as a private entity.
So they can get that 80% off deal.
Get the 80% off. So if BP wants to install charging stations, and they can get up to 80%. And it's kind of, in a way it benefits them because they continue to attract more and more consumers. And it kind of changes again, like I guess like the way that like gas stations are viewed, where they're no longer just going to be gas stations. They'll also be, where you'll be
restaurants.
True, where they're putting restaurants and like all different types of things.
Everything. So they're destinations. Sort of along that same question is, other countries use battery exchange programs where you drive into a station, exchange your battery for one fully charged, and drive off. I had never heard of that. Have you heard of the federal government considering this instead of building charging stations?
I haven't heard of it in particularly, but I would say that it would pretty much depend on like the manufacturer, since it would depend on like their capabilities of whether or not they would be able to detach the battery
and have the same battery for every car. Seems complicated. Okay, so can the Illinois credit be applied to a used car if the car did not get the credit when originally purchased?
Yeah, so long as it's a used vehicle, then it would be exempt from like the July 1st um rule.
So a car that was bought in June, wait,
And
it
July,
is eligible. It is eligible for the rebate
yeah, so if you
purchased before July.
sorry, if it was purchased before July, no, it would have to be
Okay.
purchased after July. Yeah. But
Okay.
let's say if you bought a car that's from like 2015 after July 1st, then it would qualify
Mhm.
for incentive.
Oh, okay. So you can buy a used
Yeah,
Tesla.
from 2018 and it would qualify for the it just
Oh,
has to be it just has to be bought after July
after.
1st and we're already July
Yeah.
28th, so yeah.
Okay. Very interesting. Okay. There's a lot of questions. I'm really proud of everyone and all of these amazing questions. Do all EVs use the same chargers, or do different manufacturers use different charging, plugs? Like, is there, if you were to drive up to any given, I mean, besides a Tesla or even a Tesla, could you just plug in?
Yeah, so you could in theory plug a Tesla to like a third party charger, but what you couldn't do is use like let's say if you own a Rivian, I'm picking on Rivian, but let's say if you were to like drive to a Tesla charger, you wouldn't be able to charge it. It's the same plug-in, but it's just that there's like kind of like this like
Computers
yeah, it's like a computer thing where it basically like it
does
doesn't
not know you. They're not like,
recognize.
hi, how are you? Welcome to your charging station. Okay, but maybe that changes. But otherwise, like if I'm driving a Leaf and I'm, how some municipalities have the charging station, it shouldn't be a problem for me to plug in at any of those pay for kind of, okay, good. Do you know if you can still receive the credit on trade-ins? Trade-ins. So
Trade-ins in terms of
that's not a very clear question. If that person wants to reevaluate the question and maybe resubmit it, I can try again. I'm wondering if they just mean like a used car, which we've kind of already talked about. Let's see. Are there any, I have the same exact question. Are there any tax incentives for installing a charger in your own home?
So I know depending on the state, there are incentives. I know right now at the very moment there's only incentives for like Tesla vehicles. So like if
The
you're
Powerwall thing?
yeah, like the Powerwall
Uh-huh.
type of charger, but off the top of my head, I don't believe there's incentives being offered for like, purchasing those types of chargers, but
Maybe
all
one day.
yeah.
Okay, so one of the slides had a note about rebate cycle ending September. Could you go back to that slide or explain that, please?
Yeah.
Rebate cycle. Do you remember if I go through, would you be able to?
Yeah, I can go
Which
over it
one?
again. I know what they're.
Oh, okay. Do you want me to stop doing this then?
Oh, you could just go on to the next slide. That way
Okay.
everyone can take a look at the
Is
next
it
one.
this one? Okay.
More forward. Yeah. In that
To the
direction.
beginning.
Towards the end. Sorry.
Oh, towards the end. Okay.
Yeah, that one. Cool.
Okay.
So by deadline, what I mean is basically there has to be an application and it does have to be postmarked and mailed in within 90 days of purchasing the EV, but there is actually a rebate cycle. So what the state of Illinois is doing is that since they don't really know what like the outcome of this tax credit even is going to be, they basically set a deadline of September 30th and basically said, you pretty much have until September 30th to be able to qualify for the tax credit. But they did that just in case, for example, if like more people applied than there was money available.
Ton of people. Yeah.
Because the thing is, they don't really know how people are going to react to it. So what they did is they basically put a deadline of September 30th. And, if there's money left over, they very well could reopen it. That's definitely a possibility. But at the moment, you would have to buy the vehicle by the end of September 30th of this year. I know it's like kind
Which
of,
good luck finding one. Like
I know.
well, it's crazy. Like you could
Yeah, I know.
you get lucky, I guess. Okay. What are the chances the federal rebate for home chargers will be extended? Oh, so there is a federal rebate on home chargers. I wasn't aware of that.
Oh, that's a good question. I can definitely look into that since I don't have the answer off the top of my head. So the federal rebate. For charging. That's a good question. I actually, fortunately, do not have
Well,
an
if you find out and you want to let me know, I can send it in when I share the recording for this to everybody. So let's keep going. We still have 10 questions at least. So my worry about electric cars is that I will not be able to travel far. How many miles can you travel with an electric car? And are charging stations readily available around the US? Are there some states that are more prepared?
Yeah, so it really depends on where you live. I know a lot of rural areas in general, unfortunately, do not have access to those charging stations. But if you do live in the city, so for example, I live in Chicago and there's charging stations pretty much like on every couple blocks. So in terms of chargeability, at least for me personally, it wouldn't be an issue. But again, depending on where you live, if,
And how far you drive, like for your
yeah.
daily or
And
whatever.
another thing too to note is that each electric vehicle has different
Ranges.
yeah, like ranges. So I know, for example, Tesla, depending on which one you get, it's like the max is like 350. Lucid, I'm not sure if a lot of people have heard of Lucid. They're really cool. I actually got to see one in person like last year. They actually have a range of up to like 500 miles,
Wow.
which is insane. I believe they're like the car manufacturing company with like the highest range, which is like really, really nice. So yeah, it typically depends on like what vehicle you would get. I know like for like the Nissan Leaf, those ranges tend to be a little bit, you know,
Lower. It's a
lower.
smaller battery.
Yeah, it depends on like what you're gonna be using the vehicle for, right? Like if you're gonna be planning on doing a lot of like long distance trips, or if you're gonna be using it for work where you have to be driving back and forth like 50 miles like me every day, then in that instance I would, recommend upgrading to something with a larger battery. And also on the topic of batteries, each car charges at different rates. So that's another thing that I would recommend looking into is really at the specs of each individual car, and again, based off what your current circumstances and what situation you're in, then kind of make a decision off of that. And then in terms of like the whole US, I know again the state of Illinois, along with Michigan, Wisconsin, and then a couple other Midwestern states, kind of have this coalition of like
Oh yeah.
electrifying the West. So they're really trying to push, like green energy, more chargers, but depending again on where you live and how far you're traveling, there, let's say if you're going to like Nevada or like Montana, obviously, depending on where you're going, if it's not a large city, there very well could not be a lot of chargers. Yeah, and another thing too, and I'm like throwing a lot of
No, I love it. Keep going.
facts and random tidbits, but I believe there are actually a couple of vehicles. I know like the Chevy Silverado, their electric pickup truck that's coming out soon. That vehicle, I believe has the ability to charge another electric vehicle. So let's say if you're going
What?
with your buddy, going camping and you have like, a Tesla and your buddy has like a Chevy Silverado, they'll actually be able to charge your vehicle. So again,
Cool.
it's not like something that's like available like for every car, but again, depending on what what you're going to be
Needs are.
using it for, definitely.
I remember I saw like an ad for the F-150, the Ford F-150 electric, and it was like this working contractor guy who like plugged his saw into his truck,
Yeah,
and he was like, I am the work site. And I
I
was like, well, that's pretty snazzy. You don't even have to have power on your work site to be able to run all your tools off your vehicle,
and
which
yeah,
is
and
pretty neat. So
overall too, there's like a ton of like charging outlets like pretty much all around like any given electric vehicle. I know for pickups in
oh yeah.
particular, they do have a ton of like plugins, like whether you need, more battery for like a saw or like just to charge your phone, there, yeah, which is pretty cool.
Okay, so here's another question. Do you know how much of the Illinois rebate pool has already been expended?
That's a good question. I wouldn't have the answer to that, but that's something again that I could look into.
Okay, and then do you have any ideas about cold weather and range and how, like, does the weather affect electric vehicles at all?
Yeah, so the weather unfortunately does affect, you know, the range and also like the health of a battery. So if you're using, obviously we live in Illinois, northern Illinois, so we do tend to get a lot of really bad weather, really cold. So unfortunately that does put a strain on the battery of the scooter itself. But again, depending on which vehicle you get, so long as it has like over a certain amount of range, then you should be pretty much, okay. And again, it just really depends on what you're needing the vehicle for.
Okay, so here's another question I think you've answered. The mention of deadline being September 31st, 2022 to file. What if you purchase in October? Are you not eligible for the rebate?
So at that point, then the state of Illinois would have to like assess what their budget is for like that specific tax credit and whether or not they already met that $17 million allotment for the funding. And then essentially what would happen is once everybody, later in the year has gotten hopefully their rebates, and at that point, then the state of Illinois would reopen another rebate cycle. And they call it cycle for a reason. So it's not a year long. It would only be a couple months at a time, again, just to make sure that they're able to fund the people that submit applications during that cycle.
Okay, so does it still require long periods to fully charge on long trips?
So usually what happens is, since it is a battery, usually when you get to a certain percentage, like when it hits like 75 or 80%, the battery charging does tend to slow a lot. And that's mainly because due to like preserve the battery itself. Because obviously if you charge the battery fully up to 100%, that very well could damage the battery. So what a lot of car manufacturers are doing is they kind of like, once it hits a certain point, then charging slows and gets slower and slower and slower until it finally hits that 100%.
We have an EV on order and it is unlikely to arrive before September 30th. Will the state program be extended?
So long as you have paperwork that you purchased it after July 1st and before September 30th, you would be fine. Yeah, so long as
good.
And you're good with that.
To reconfirm, a used car purchase after July qualifies for the Illinois credit, but not for the federal credit. I think this is the resubmission of that one question we were unclear about. Okay, that's awesome. That's really good because, I mean, like you mentioned, the Teslas do not qualify for the federal credit anymore. Nope. But you could probably get a used Tesla that might reflect the federal credit. Trade-in meeting. Okay, so a trade-in meeting, you trade in a regular non-EV to buy a new EV. I don't think, well, she's saying that if you have a regular gas car and you trade it in and it goes towards the credit of an EV, would you qualify for this credit?
That's a good question.
I can't imagine that it wouldn't be, because I mean, it would be like it's a down payment on a vehicle. Like, I don't think it would affect, I mean, that's my uneducated opinion, but okay. Okay, how safe is it to hang around charging stations at night in secluded areas? Are safety precautions taken into account while your vehicle is charging?
So it depends on essentially like where the charging stations are located. The push really is to obviously have them in highly accessible areas where there's a lot of high traffic. So typically meaning that area will tend to be safer. But yeah, again, it really depends on where you would be going. in terms of like the charging stations. My best bet would be to go anywhere where you see there's a lot of people, make best judgment, and then,
And where do you find this rebate application? That's a really good question.
so that would be on the state of Illinois' website. So if you actually just type in CJA, which is the act that was just passed last year, you would be able to find the application on there for the Illinois tax credit. And as I mentioned, for the Illinois credit, there will be a lot of documentation that you'll have to provide with the application. So like W-9, proof of residency, again, because it's only open to Illinois, people that live in Illinois. So yeah, you're able to find that on their website.
What is the life of a battery? What would the replacement of the battery cost in a ballpark figure?
So it's kind of like if you were to compare it, essentially, it's like the engine of the car, except that obviously, like you don't have to do oil changes and like regular maintenance and whatnot. On average, the battery could last up to like anywhere past like 8 years to 12 years. It really depends on how you maintain the battery itself. So for example, are you always charging it to 100%? Are you always letting it go hit 0%? So again, it depends on how you maintain it in terms of like charging it. But yeah, and on average, they do tend to have a pretty long life. And in terms of replacing it, like the battery, again, since it is essentially like the engine of like a internal combustion engine car, it could cost you up to like $20,000, which is it's a lot of money. But essentially, that's what the car needs to run on to be able to work.
So to get the Illinois $4,000 rebate, I have to buy a car between July and September 30th of this year. What about if I want to buy one in the spring? Is the money just gone until July 2026 when the rebate becomes 2,000?
Yeah, so if there's no more money left, then you would have to wait until the state reassesses their funding for 2026.
But to be fair, there is really a lot of money. Like what was it was like $17 million, or I don't, maybe not even, it was the number that was attached to the bill. I don't know if it all goes to the EV rebates, but I was astounded by the amount of money that was part of this bill as far as our state was concerned. So, I mean, maybe I'm a hopeful person, but I think that I have hope that it would go past this year.
Yeah, to be honest, I think it will, mainly obviously because of like the availability of these vehicles. Obviously, they're pretty like rare to come, to find. And even if you do find one, it's like over $100,000, and they're priced that way because there are very few of them. And I actually did the math of how many people would be eligible to qualify for the incentive. And this is just so long as their vehicles. So this isn't taking into consideration the motorcycles, but very well up to like, 4,200 people could receive this incentive. But then, again, you have to think like, what is the likelihood of 4,200 people just running to the dealer and buying, a car before September 30th? So most likely the cycle will be extended, and you'll be able to qualify for that incentive.
Somebody asked, are old EV batteries creating a future environmental problem?
Yeah, so again, depending on the battery, it actually could cause more like pollution than like a regular like internal combustion engine car. I know, like for example, like um GMC's Hummer, their electric vehicle, there's actually studies that have shown that it produces more pollution than certain like gas cars.
Just to create the vehicle?
Yeah, or yeah, like to create the vehicle essentially, because you have to take into consideration like all the parts that are needed and whatnot. But then obviously it's a huge battery, and the good thing is that you're able to actually recycle that battery, and they're able to
Reuse
make it so that it
in
doesn't harm
ways.
the environment. Yeah.
The home oh, this is good. Somebody shared with us that the home charger rebate program is called the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Tax Credit. Chargers needed to be installed before 12/31/21. So this is a no longer available credit, but it did exist for home chargers. Maybe there will be something new.
And
okay.
yeah, really quick. That's if it's at the federal level, then maybe I could talk, and see what the congressman would think about, perhaps looking into introducing some legislation to see if funding could become available for that. Obviously,
Another round of it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, there's good news today and yesterday about environmental protections and money going towards things. So maybe, who knows? If you buy a used Tesla from a friend, does it qualify for a credit if your friend didn't get the credit?
So
I think we sort of, well, yeah, go ahead.
the thing about that is that it would have to be purchased directly from a licensed dealer through the Secretary of State. So you would have to actually go to like a dealer and buy the used car there. So you wouldn't be able to hand your money hand your money to your friend and then be like, hey, I'll purchase your car. It would have to go through like the licensed dealer.
Okay, good to know.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is our last kind of comment. Thank you for the presentation, and to Brad Schneider's office, who has done so much good for our district, which I just love. Thank you for that comment.
Yeah.
And lots of thank yous to you, Adrian, and all of your knowledge. But of course, as Adrian mentioned, if you have other questions, let me get to that slide. I'll go back to the end to reach out to him directly. And I'm sure he can, if he doesn't know the answer off the top of his head, he'll figure out a way to find the answer or take the question to somebody that does know the answer. So write his name and contact info down and reach out if you see fit. As mentioned, we recorded this tonight, so look out for it in your email box and feel free to share it with your friends and family who want to get on the EV bandwagon in the state of Illinois. I think this is just such an amazing state sort of gift. This is a progressive thing going on in our state. It's not going on in every other state. So I would feel lucky to be able to take advantage of it. And with that, Adrian, I thank you for your time and all of your hard work on this. And I look forward to meeting you in person someday. Welcome to the neighborhood.
I know, right? I've been up here for like 3 months now, so yeah, enjoying it.
All right, everyone, enjoy your evening and thank you for attending tonight. Bye-bye.